Hello again. I wanted to tell you today about one of the great treasures I discovered in the years immediately following our departure from the Watchtower. Looking around for reliable teachers, which of course you don't need if you're in an organization that has the truth. But one of the great treasures I discovered within the first few years of my book searching was Frederic Louis Godet. Godet, who has 4 great commentaries on the New Testament, which are continuously in print 130 to 150 years after their publication. His Gospel of John, 2 volumes originally. His exposition commentary on Romans, and 2 that I used within the first few years of my becoming a Christian to help me develop Bible classes with the group that assembled in our home and in our store later. His commentary on Luke, and this one. Commentary on 1 Corinthians. So 3,000 pages altogether of lucid, dense, but approachable prose on 4 of the most important books in the Bible. So not only did he do 4 commentaries that are continuously with us and blessing Christians generation after generation, but he wrote several other books which I enjoyed reading during that time, less strenuous because they were on more general subjects, but one of them was his defense of the gospel, one of the great books of apologetics you can also acquire today. Godet was a Swiss Reformed minister, born in 1812, died in 1900. His early training was by his mother, because his father, the lawyer, died early in his life. His mother was not only his tutor, but later became the tutor of Frederic William, the Crown Prince of Prussia, before the unification of the German Empire. Later, Godet himself, after he'd become a minister, succeeded his mother as tutor to the Crown Prince and became chaplain, ultimately, to the royal family of Prussia. Later in his life, Godet spent much of his time defending the faith, the historic Reformed faith, against the inroads of unbelief, and especially the destructive criticism. He wasn't against the principles of the higher criticism in general, but against the destructive criticism that had found its home among the German critics. He had been trained with Hengstenberg and Tulloch, and especially Neander, at the universities of Bonn and Berlin. So he was just the man in the right place at the right time to take on the negative aspects of the higher criticism. That's why his books are still treasurable. One of the issues he deals with extensively in his commentary on Corinthians is, of course, the resurrection, because there's no book in the Bible that is more emphatic about the nature of Christ's resurrection than 1 Corinthians is. And of course, is it the longest chapter in Paul? 1 Corinthians 15 on that subject. So when he takes up the issue of unbelief in Western Europe in his own day, he is deliberately targeting the issue that ultimately the faith of Christianity depends upon, the reality of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This book, by the way, his commentary on 1 Corinthians, was published in the year of the first volume of Charles Taze Russell's books, The Divine Plan of the Ages, 1886. Now, he takes on, interestingly, the position that became identified with Jehovah's Witnesses in the last 120, 30 years since Russell's day, the nature of the resurrection body. He takes on that, but he also takes on one that is even more prominent right now, i.e. the legendary explanation of the resurrection of Christ. He takes them on in this quote. He talks about the theory of Bernard Weiss, a liberal scholar of Godet's day, and I quote, who thinks that every time Jesus wished to appear, he clothed himself in a sensible and corporal exterior. It needs simply to be remembered that according to our gospel narratives, the body of Jesus was not immediately transformed into a spiritual body by his resurrection. It was still in its former body, restored, that he showed himself, though his body was already subject to other conditions of existence and activity than our earthly body. It was not till the ascension that the substitution of the spiritual for the earthly body was fully consummated. Jesus himself indicated the gradual process which was taking place in him when he said to Mary Magdalene on the very day of his resurrection, in John 20, verse 17, "I am not yet ascended unto my Father, but I ascend." And as to the legendary explanation of the resurrection, he says this: "As to the opinion which because of this alleged contradiction would convert the gospel narratives into later legends, it meets with an insurmountable obstacle in the fact that these narratives are the redaction of the apostolical tradition daily reproduced in the churches by the apostles themselves, and the evangelists formed by them from the day of Pentecost downwards. This is what appears from the nature of things, and what we find established in this very chapter, that is chapter 15, in which the apostle enumerates as apostolical traditions the principal appearances described in our Gospels. That Paul himself thinks of bodily appearances is beyond all doubt, in view of the inference which he draws from them, to wit, our own bodily resurrection as the ultimate hope." So it's obviously Godet's contention that we cannot explain away the bodily appearances of Christ by simply saying that he put on a body like the angels appeared to be able to do in the Old Testament. No, it was the body. That's why in 1 Corinthians 15 Paul says he died for our sins according to the scriptures. He was buried, and he rose again on the third day according to the scriptures. The only eschatology that the Jews had in those days of resurrection was the resurrection of a physical body. So Godet is not only stressing that Paul is continuous with his Jewish background, but he's stressing the nature of the gospel appearances themselves conduces to firmly give us the image of Christ rising in the very body he had, although he admits here it's subject to some transformation, which we can't explain, of course, having no analogies. But his ascension body, his spiritual body that Paul talks about, is not only Christ's ultimate destiny, but ours too, was not yet, of course, in view in the gospel accounts of the resurrection. So Godet was one of the great champions of the historic faith, and I find it absolutely wonderful that we have such men available to us today. We don't have to despair. We don't have to think God is not spoken and he has no champions. There's always been voices who have been clear and distinct and powerful in the face of unbelief. Frederic Godet, commentary on 1 Corinthians.